In less than 2 months, Donald Trump could be elected President of the United States of America. But what do we actually know about him? And why has he been so popular? Today, an UpFront special. I'm Mehdi Hasan. It's without doubt the strangest US presidential election in living memory, with the Republican nominee having defied all the rules and all the pundits. But how do you get inside the head of a candidate as unique as Donald Trump? The property tycoon turned reality TV star who's been described as dangerous, crazy and racist by senior members of his own party. I'll ask two of Trump's biographers. And then there are his supporters, Trump's army of loyal fans who helped get him to where he is today. Why do they think, in the face of so much evidence to the contrary, that the Donald is qualified to be commander-in-chief? That he'll make America great again? Are Trump voters driven by economic insecurity or just old-fashioned racism? I'm joined to discuss Donald Trump by a trio of authors who've spent years studying the man. Gwenda Blair is author of The Trumps, 3 Generations That Built an Empire. David K. Johnston is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of The Making of Donald Trump. And McKay Coppins is senior political writer at BuzzFeed, author of a book on the Republican Party called The Wilderness, and of a 2014 profile piece on Trump, which resulted in Trump calling him a scumbag. McKay, let me start with you. What was it about that piece that so upset Donald Trump? And what was your big takeaway from spending so much time with him back when he hadn't even officially announced he was going to run for president?
Yeah, well, when I was writing about him, this was early 2014, so he was really, this was a story about the Donald in winter, right? He had been kind of cast out by the Republican Party. All the people who he had desperately courted in 2012 were ignoring him, mocking him. And that was basically what I wrote. At the time, he was fanning the flames of possibly running for governor of New York. He was also talking about running for president in 2016. And he had been doing this for 25 years. So the piece that I wrote, I think the title was 36 Hours on the Fake Campaign Trail with Donald Trump. It called his bluff, basically saying, look, he always says he's going to run for something. He never does. And that really seemed to get under his skin.
And for those of us who spend a few hours with him every day now on cable news or on social media, what was it like spending 36 hours with the man in person at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida?
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's definitely a certain degree of vulnerability there that I feel like doesn't come through in the televised version of Donald Trump. He's an insecure man. He really cares about his status in the world, people disrespecting him, especially people he thinks are important or influential. And that really was what struck me most about him.
David K. Johnston, you've known Donald Trump for almost 30 years. You've written a new biography of him. Describe him to our viewers in a single sentence, if you can.
World-class narcissist, totally focused on money, and who sees all other people as either fans who recognize his greatness or loser.
That's an interesting description. I mean, does this personality of Donald Trump's, this kind of giving of offense, this narcissism, the serial dishonesty that's been well documented by the press, does it go back beyond this political campaign, even back to his childhood?
Oh, sure. Donald is someone who creates his own reality. And he has no problems saying, I never said that, when there's plenty of record of it, asserting things that are preposterous. Because to Donald, if he said it, that makes it true. And he also has been gotten away with it because he has threatened every major news organization with litigation. He called me at home in April and told me, if I don't like what you write, I'm going to sue you, David. And he's the only politician in 50 years as a journalist, from the city council in Santa Cruz, California, to the White House, who's ever said that. But he gets away with it, and he's cowed a lot of the American press because he can tie them up in expensive litigation, and he knows it.
David, how much of his personality is him, is something he can't control? People say, oh, he's crazy, he's unhinged. And how much of it is just attention-seeking? He just wants to be on TV, so he says things cynically, deliberately.
I'm not sure that I know that. Gwenda probably is more the expert on that particular point. But Donald is P.T. Barnum, the American museum guy who sold hoaxes and fakes to people, with one difference. He never hurt anybody. Donald's hurt a lot of people.
Gwenda, same question to you.
He's hyper competitive, I think, and he's really, every transaction, everything for him is transactional. What can I get out of it? He walks into a room, he sizes everybody up, who's the biggest person in the room, and he immediately goes over to that person and makes it clear that he's the alpha dog in the room. He's the alpha guy, he's in charge. Yes. Bow wow, exactly.
Okay.
And that's how he does everything.
But is what you see what you get with Donald Trump, McKay?
So my theory on this, and maybe these other two biographers can correct me, my theory on this is that if you look at the early interviews that Trump did, televised interviews, very early in his career, he was nowhere near as absurd as he is now. I think that he put on this he created this persona in the New York City press to court the New York City tabloids, which he did masterfully in the 70s and 80s. And at some point, I think that this persona he created, which was rooted at some point in his reality, just replaced whatever other personality he had through decades of method acting, and now this is who he is. I don't think he gets home and casts off this personality and is a totally different person.
He's become that person. Gwenda, why, let me ask all of you this, beginning with Gwenda, why is he running for president, do you think? Is he running because he truly wants to be president, to serve 2 terms as commander-in-chief, or just because he liked the idea of it, the fame associated with it, and when he originally decided to run, he didn't think he would get this far?
He's about winning. And what is the biggest contest in the world? What's the biggest gold ring there is? It's running.
So you think he actually wants to be president? He wants to be president. He's very keen to be.
I think he wants to have the biggest win the biggest contest there is. You know, he's said that he would outsource all that boring stuff. He's not interested in that. He's interested in the winning. He says, I'm going to have other people take care of the boring, the policy details. Ugh, who wants that? And his attention span, as many have attested, is nanoseconds. When I interviewed him, and I'm sure David had the same experience, getting him to actually answer a question was really kind of tough. What we hear of the sheer volume of material and crises that hit a president every single day, day in and day out, and the idea of somebody who has the attention span of, to be generous, an 8th grader, maybe, on a really, really important day of school.
Yeah.
That is really a very disturbing thing. And how much can things be boiled down and simplified? He goes by his gut. He does not hand things off any decision making. If he decides it, it's the right decision, and whatever happens, it's a success.
Okay, David, just sticking with that,
Right.
How much does he want to be president?
Oh, Donald wants to be president. He doesn't want the duties and responsibilities of being president. He wants us to recognize that he's superior to the rest of us. And the way to prove that is, as Gwenda pointed out, you get elected president. But as president, he has no idea what to do. He doesn't know what the duties, powers, and limitations are. He has no policies whatsoever except adulation.
One of his former aides said recently that when the campaign was set up, it was seen as a way of boosting his brand. It's all about the Trump brand. And he only wanted to come a respectable second to say, look how well I did.
No, I think that was a backup plan. Donald was about to lose his TV show for bad ratings. And he has demonstrated he had a bigger audience. He has now, however, damaged that brand and created a new problem for himself if and when he loses. But Donald wants to be the title of president. He wants to be president in title. He doesn't want to do the job. He doesn't have any real vision for America. He has no policies except the glorification of the great leader.
McKay, you wrote recently that Trump has a massive chip on his shoulder, that he's both annoyed by and desperate for establishment approval, and that's what drives him. Explain a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, if you look at his entire life and career, he is always, even though he was born into a wealthy family, even though he had all the perks and privileges of somebody who was very rich in America, if you go throughout his career, he's always found himself in contention with kind of these sneering insiders who laugh at him and think he's a joke. And I think that status anxiety has driven a lot of what he's done, and he's been very successful.
David, there'll be a lot of people watching this around the world who think, look, For all his faults, he's a businessman, he's a tycoon, a billionaire. Maybe that's what America needs right now rather than another career politician, a dynamic CEO in charge. What's wrong with that view?
Well, first of all, there's no evidence Donald is a billionaire. He's a wealthy man, but no evidence he's a billionaire. But his style is not to build and to create wealth. His style is he's cheated workers out of their pay and been found by a judge to have engaged in a conspiracy to do so. Illegal immigrants, by the way. He's cheated vendors. There are thousands of lawsuits against him. He's been repeatedly accused of swindling investors in Trump projects. He's a con artist. And as a con artist, he listens to what you say, and then he gives you back an answer of what he thinks you want to hear. That's how con artists succeed. And he's conned tens of millions of Americans into thinking he's serious.
You mentioned judges and crime. Is it true that when he was starting out as a builder, as a developer in Manhattan, he allegedly worked with the mob, with the mafia?
Well, the other builders went to the FBI and said, free us of these mobsters. Donald ran and embraced these people, and it was profitable for him. And he's done this throughout his life. Con artists, swindlers, Russian mobsters, a major drug trafficker he risked his casino license for. And one of the things that hasn't been discussed in the news media in America at all, on the big networks, in the big papers, is why did Donald Trump risk his casino license for a major drug trafficker? Why was it so crucial this man be his friend and not his enemy that he risked his casino license?
Gwenda, Blair, you've written a lot about the Trump family. I mean, when you look at the way they operate, the Trump family, financially, in terms of the business model, what do you come away with? How would you summarize the way he runs his businesses and makes money?
Win. Win, success, whatever you do is right. And
even if you bend the rules or break the rules?
Bend the rules, do whatever it takes. I think that there's been a through line from his grandfather to his father to him. You see a loophole, you march right through it. One of the things that has not gotten enough attention is how important The Apprentice was for him. 10 years of people watching him be the guy who's in charge.
His reality TV show.
The reality TV show, which people watching him be the person who hired and fired people, the big boss, the one who made the final decisions, that's really imprinted the idea of him as the guy in charge, I think, that in a way that's been very powerful. And he's backed that up during the campaign by saying again and again and again, the U.S. is on the brink of disaster. It's about to collapse. You need a strong man, a Putin-like man, in order to fix it. And guess what? How about this guy we've been watching for 10 years on TV be that strong man? The other thing that's come in handy for him besides The Apprentice, the reality TV show, is Twitter. What a gift to him. It's his way of just bowling past, barreling past any kind of closer look at anything he says. It's been terrific for him.
To all of you, how do you think he'll react if he wakes up on the morning of Wednesday, 9th of November, to discover Hillary has won? How will he personally take defeat, Gwenda?
It was rigged. If I didn't win, it was rigged. That's already underway. It's been underway for months.
Well, and actually, remember, I write about this in my book. Remember, on the night of the 2012 election, he had endorsed Mitt Romney, he was part of the Romney campaign. When Barack Obama won, when the networks called it for Barack Obama, he went on a Twitter tirade saying that this was a sham, a travesty, that people should take to the streets. Now, at the time, he was a reality TV star. No one took him seriously. Fast forward 4 years, if he tries to do the same thing, there might be people in the streets. It's a genuinely frightening prospect.
He's already called for violence over this. He's encouraged armed people to show up at American voting places, and he makes it clear that's where black people, Hispanic people will be voting, not his people, white people.
We're going to take a pause there. It's time now for a reality check. It's become fashionable in some quarters to suggest Hillary Clinton is more dangerous than Donald Trump, more of a warmonger, while her Republican opponent is an isolationist, a non-interventionist. Hillary is a hawk and Donald is a dove. It's complete nonsense. Don't take my word for it, just listen to the Donald himself.
I'm more militaristic than anybody in this room.
I'm gonna bomb the out of them. Waterboarding would be fine. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families.
Funny sort of dove, isn't he? And yes, hawkish Hillary wants a no-fly zone over Syria, but dovish Donald wants to put boots on the ground. Loads of them.
I would listen to the generals, but I'm hearing numbers of 20 to 30,000. We have to knock them out fast.
Deploying up to 30,000 US troops in the Middle East doesn't sound very dovish to me. But Hillary backed the Iraq War. Trump opposed it. Except...
Are you for invading Iraq?
Yeah, I guess
So.
Oh, well, at least he opposed the intervention in Libya, which Hillary was totally behind. Except
Gaddafi in Libya is killing thousands of people. Now, we should go in, we should stop this guy, which would be very easy and very quick.
Oh, so he's not anti-war. In fact, he's so trigger-happy, he's even willing to use nuclear weapons against ISIL. Yeah, and even Europe isn't totally safe if Donald gets his tiny hands on the nuclear button.
How about Europe? We won't use it in Europe.
I'm not going to take it off the table.
So yes, Trump's a dove. If being a dove means bombing the out of people, bringing back waterboarding and worse, murdering the families of terror suspects, backing the interventions in Iraq and Libya, and refusing to rule out the use of nukes, not just in the Middle East, but on the continent of Europe too. I'll leave the last word to the guy who ghost wrote Trump's best-selling book, and now says he genuinely believes that if Trump wins and gets the nuclear codes, there's an excellent possibility it will lead to the end of civilization. See? Nothing to worry about. We're talking Trump on UpFront. Gwenda Blair has had to leave us, but we're joined now from San Francisco by J.D. Vance, author of the new book HILLBILLY, ELEGY, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, which casts a light on some of those often forgotten areas of the United States where Trump has gathered so much support. And from Atlanta by Andrea Gillespie, who's Associate Professor of Politics at Emory University and a specialist on race relations and civil rights. I want to move the discussion on from Trump himself to Trump voters, to his supporters. Who are they? J.D. Vance, you spend a lot of time around Trump voters. You spent a lot of time. I believe your parents are voting for him too. How would you describe the archetypal Trump voter? The kind of person who turns up to his rallies, who buys his Make America Great Again baseball cap. Is it fair to say that he's a middle-aged white man without a college degree who may have been left behind by globalization?
Well, it's definitely a fair characterization. It's always tough to reduce a pretty complex phenomenon with millions of people to one or two variables. But if you look at Trump's voters, they are less likely to have a college degree. They're more likely to be white, more likely to be middle-aged, and more likely to be male. And I would say the archetypical quality that I think of as associating with Trump voters is that they're extremely pessimistic about their future, extremely pessimistic about their children's future. And that cynicism has really taken its toll culturally on a lot of the areas where these folks live.
JD, a big recent study by Gallup of Trump voters seemed to undermine the image of the average Trump voter being a poor working-class white guy who has to compete with immigrants to get work. It found Trump voters, quote, earn relative high household incomes and that living in areas more exposed to trade or immigration does not increase Trump support. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's broadly correct, right? So if you look at the areas where Trump is most popular, it's not areas that are especially exposed to immigration. But what it is areas where you see rising mortality rates, more and more people dying of heroin overdoses, more and more folks who are getting left behind in some not just economic way, but also often, more importantly, in a social way. They're pessimistic because they see a lot of the social indicators from divorce to mortality are going in the wrong direction in their communities.
Andrea Gillespie, you tweeted recently that Trump's speeches on immigration are, quote, chock full of racial codes. Is he, in your view, proactively reaching out to racists? And is racism, xenophobia, white insecurity, whatever you want to call it, is that what's really driving support for his campaign, in your view?
Well, I mean, one of the ways that you can see that it does energize the base is I've had a chance to attend Trump rallies. And there was one rally in Atlanta, for instance, where he started talking about Supreme Court justices. So this would be the type of issue that would galvanize a Ted Cruz supporter. And it fell really flat. And Trump noticed that it was falling flat. So he followed that up immediately with, we're going to build the wall, which again excites people. And given the number of people in his base who indicated that immigration was an important issue, this is something that's important to kind of keep in mind.
JD, what's your response to that?
I think there's always a danger to try to reduce the Trump phenomenon to just one or two things, right? So people talk about whether it's economic insecurity, whether it's racial anxiety. The truth is that it's probably both things, but then it's also a lot of other things too. I think what Trump is not just doing, I mean, certainly he's exploiting some of the racism that's there, but he's also exploiting people's fears and pointing it in a direction that maybe they wouldn't go on their own. So I think it's both that Trump is drawing on something, but more importantly, I think that he's leading people in a very dark direction, and that's ultimately what worries me the most about Trump.
David K. Johnston, you've written a biography of Donald Trump. You know his business background. He presents himself as this great business leader. You've also said that Trump is an active enemy of the people who have been ruined by this economy, yet you also say they're buying his con job. Why are they buying it?
Well,
why are they identifying with him?
The bottom 90% of Americans in 2014 had the same income as they did in 1967 when you adjust for inflation. It's a tiny difference. And the bottom half of Americans are living in a state of economic terror. Lots of people in America now, if you lose your job, you don't even get unemployment benefits. And so they are living in a state of being fearful about the future. And Trump comes along and says, I have the answer for you. It's the Mexicans, it's the blacks, it's his phrase, the blacks, it's the Chinese, it's the idiots in Washington. And like all demagogues, he's now sold this as a simple idea. And Donald's a master salesman. He's a household name. He's also a con artist, but he's tapped into this anxiety and fear by people who don't understand public policy.
And economic anxiety makes people more susceptible to demagogic and racist messages.
Absolutely. And when Donald announced this time, he in Midtown Manhattan gave this racist, xenophobic speech because he's a racist.
They're sending us rapists from Mexico.
And he was applauded by all these well-dressed young people. Well, it turned out, Midtown Manhattan is not a place known for this. Donald Trump lost Manhattan in the primary by a huge margin. It turns out they were paid actors. And Donald's whole campaign is the same thing. It's a con job.
Okay, Andrew Gillespie, the internal post-mortem that the Republicans conducted after the 2012 defeat, Mitt Romney to Barack Obama, concluded that the party needed to be more inclusive in terms of bringing in minority voters. How badly has Trump damaged any potential future efforts by Republicans to get blacks or Hispanic voters to plump for the Republican Party?
So Trump has done grave damage to the Republican Party's efforts to reach out to minority voters. They're still trying the plan that they wanted to put into place. So in part, the outreach efforts that you've seen the Trump campaign do in African American communities are being designed jointly with the Republican National Committee to be present in black communities and to hope to, in the long run, be able to reach out to them. But in general, what Trump has done is he has reinforced a narrative that the Republican Party is anti-civil rights and that their views are antithetical to the interests of blacks and to Latinos, and by extension to Asian Americans as well. And so it's going to take a long time to overcome that perceptual hurdle.
McKay, just on the Republican Party itself, you and others have documented that it's always had this paranoid, anti-establishment, aggressive, conspiratorial fringe element, this nativist element on the fringe, but it's been on the fringe. Has that fringe now taken over the party, and is that for good?
I think it certainly has become a parallel establishment within the party. One of the things I write about in the book is about how over the past 10 years, two things that have happened, which are the democratization of media, the rise of the internet, and then the deregulation of political money and political donations, has made it so that there has been this entire parallel counter-establishment, very right-wing, very fringy. Think of websites like Breitbart.
They have different sources of media, different sources of information.
Yeah, and they've become so powerful that, Donald Trump would not have been able to succeed in this Republican primary without that establishment helping him, right? Without the talk radio hosts on the airwaves constantly defending him, without websites like Breitbart constantly going to bat for him. If he didn't have all of that, it would have made it a lot easier for the Republican National Committee to come in there and knock him out with some more polished candidate. But the RNC, the Republican establishment, the political establishment in general, the old guard, just doesn't have that influence anymore in American politics.
JD and Andrew, final question to you guys. How worried are you both about the phenomenon of these kind of angry, anti-evidence Trump voters, Trump base, whatever you want to call it, who will exist long beyond Donald Trump's political campaign or career? JD?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely worried about it and how it affects our politics for the next 4, 8, 10 years. But I think that if the Republican Party, if the Democratic Party was a little bit smarter, and if they treated their voters with a little bit more respect, we might actually have a better politics. So I definitely agree that our democracy is in trouble. But I tend to place the blame on the party elites and less on the voters. And my hope and my optimism is that if the party did a little bit better, that the democracy would be a little bit better too.
I agree with JD. It's the elites. It's not the voters.
Andrew.
In good part.
So while I'll agree that the parties themselves need to be more attuned to the needs and the interests of their voters, I should say that we probably shouldn't have been surprised by the rise of Trump. We saw the rise of the Tea Party, and we know from public opinion data that members of the Tea Party expressed more racially resentful views than their counterparts who did not identify with the Tea Party. And given the force that that was in the Republican Party for a long stream of time, we should have realized that there was some type of racial reaction that was going on after the election of Barack Obama.
McKay, I'm going to give you the last word. 2 years ago, you predicted Donald Trump would not run for president. He has now run. He's won the Republican primary. We are weeks away from Election Day. Is he going to be president of the United States of America?
I think it's very unlikely, but I'm sure, I don't know. My predictions shouldn't matter that much, as we've seen.
David, I'm going to give you the last word. Do you think he's going to be president?
It is within the realm of possibility. It depends a lot on turnout. If he is president, I don't think he'll get through one term without being impeached for extra constitutional, extra legal actions.
On that note, we're out of time, everyone. Thank you all for joining me on this special show. Up Front will be back next week.